Listen now to the readings. First, from the 31st Psalm, hear this word. In thee, O Lord, do I seek refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In thy righteousness deliver me. Incline thy ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be thou a rock of refuge for me, and a strong fortress to save me. Yea, thou art my rock and my fortress. For thy name's sake, lead me and guide me. Take me out of the net which is hidden for me, for thou art my refuge. Into thy hand I commit my spirit. Thou hast redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. Thou hatest those who pay regard to vain idols, but I will trust in the Lord. I will rejoice and be glad for thy steadfast love, because thou hast seen my affliction. Thou hast taken heed of my adversities, and hast not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. Thou hast set my feet in a broad place. And then turning over, hear this word from the Apostle Paul, writing to the church in Philippi, from the 4th chapter. I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but had no opportunity. Not that I complain of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound in any and all circumstances. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger and abundance and want. I can do all things in him who strengthens me. This is the word of the Lord. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, as you know, the first week of a new year always seems like a time for lots of predictions, at least as I watched the news reports this past week and my inbox. 10 stocks that are sure to rise for 2016. Did you get that? I tried it last year with the 10 stocks that were going to go high in 2015. I would have done better to put my money in the mattress, 10 stocks sure to rise 2016. 4 politicians who are sure to surge, or alternatively, 3 who are sure to collapse in the months ahead. Take your pick. At Christmas time, we have wise men bearing gifts, but at New Year's, we have wise men making lists, or pundits making lists, so to speak. So I thought, let me get into this. I'm going to make my prediction this morning. And the one prediction I am prepared to make with absolute confidence is that the next 12 months, 2016, will bring to us and to our world all kinds of events that nobody could predict. That's my prediction. Life is unpredictable. That's the only thing I'm confident to tell you with certainty, and it is that not very profound, but I think strangely neglected idea that drew me to this passage from Philippians for a New Year's Sunday sermon. Paul, writing to this early church, I can do all things, Paul says, through him who strengthens me. That's what he says to the Philippians. Actually, I like better the translation of that verse from, not the RSV, which I typically read, but from J.B. Phillips. It's a more modern rendering. J.B. Phillips renders the same verse, I am ready for anything through the strength of the one who lives within me. I think that's probably a little better rendering here, because Paul's not really bragging here about what he can do, the I can do all things. Paul, he's not bragging like that. What he is talking about, of course, is a kind of a spiritual confidence, a resilience or a toughness, if you will, that has come out of his faith in God, so that whatever came his way as the future unfolded, he could not only take it, but he could embrace it, because of his connection to God, and because he knew that though he didn't have privy to knowledge of all that the future was going to hold for him, he knew that God would be in his future, and that would get him through, come what may. And to my ear, this reading from Philippians 4 sounds like an attitude that would befit all of us, as we stand on the threshold of a new year, not knowing all that's going to come. How are we going to face the uncertainty of the days ahead? And what are the resources for building that same kind of spiritual toughness or resilience that Paul had? Paul, you remember, wrote that letter when he was a prisoner. He was in jail in Rome. And what we know about this section from Philippians 4 is it's at least in part something of a thank you note to that church. The church in Philippi, while Paul was in jail in Rome, had sent him some kind of a care package. We don't know exactly what it was, but some prisoner package that Paul had received. And some of what comprises the letter of Philippians is Paul's thank you back. I don't know, I've been writing thank yous this week. Maybe some of you have too. Thank you notes can be tricky. And it was, interestingly, for Paul. Here's how he starts his thank you note in the 4th chapter. It has been a great joy to me that after all this time you have shown an interest in my welfare. And then he sort of has to soften that up. It's like, oops, that sounds a little harsh. After all this time you have shown an interest in my welfare. And then he softens it. Not that you had forgotten me, but up to now you had no opportunity for expressing your concern. So, he's softening him, getting better. And then he went on to say, really, I think something that really came right out of his heart. What Christ was helping him through there in his jail time in Rome, and what Christ had done through his trials as a missionary. Think about all of the shipwrecks and the beatings and being run out of town. He had a tough, hard life, but what he does after he kind of fumbles into the thank you, it says, and let me just tell you, this is from my heart. This is what my faith has done for me up to now, and what it's still doing for me. What it's still doing for me as I sit here in my jail cell in Rome. Nor do I mean I have been in actual need, for I have learned to be content, whatever my circumstances. I know how to live when things are difficult, and I know how to live when things are prosperous. I am ready for anything through the strength of the one who lives within me. That's That's good stuff, I think, for the first Sunday in a new year. And I thought maybe the best thing I could do in light of that passage is to kind of flesh out, using Paul as an example, of what are some of the qualities of his own spirituality, his own faith, that helped him get to that place where he really does have that kind of toughness and fortitude. One thing is clear. I think one real asset that Paul found in his connection to God, in his connection to Christ, was a real sense of where his worth came from, his sense of identity. Paul really did live with a sense that his value as a person was a gift rather than an achievement. I mean, in terms of achievements, Paul had done a lot of things he was not particularly proud of, especially in his early days when he was Saul the Pharisee. But Paul came very, very much, I think, to feel after his transformation and after Christ became real to him and a part of his life, that his value, he didn't have to prove his value by what he did, that it was a gift. I read a good blog this last week from Gregory Palmer. You remember Bishop Palmer, who was our bishop some years back? In fact, he preached right here from this pulpit at least one time. And I've looked, his blog, he does a good little reflection occasionally. And last month he wrote what he thinks are the 3 fundamental lies that people tell themselves spiritually that are sure to get you off the track. You want to know what they are? Here are the 3 fundamental lies you can tell yourself to get off the track. Lie number 1, I am what I do. That can get you off the track. I am what I do. Lie number 2, I am what I have. Or lie number 3, I am what other people tell me I am. And when you think of life on those terms, through that lens of I am what I achieve, all the time you feel under the gun of having to measure up to that, and then when you fail, it's a calamity because your worth is all tied up in your accomplishments. I mean, there's a reason why the psalmist would say, this is the day the Lord has made, let us rejoice and be glad in it, because if it's the Lord's day and not mine, I'm not responsible for making it all come out just right, but if it's my day, if my achievements are central, then if things don't go right, if I'm not able to make the day come out perfectly, it's a disaster. I'm a failure. Paul didn't think that way, and he didn't live that way. For him, at least once he got connected to Jesus, he knew his worth was given and not earned, and would say it over and over. By grace are you saved through faith. It is not your own doing, lest anyone should boast. Or then in another place to the Corinthians, I love this part. By the grace of God, he would say, by the grace of God, I am what I am. There you go. There you go. I don't have anything to prove. It's a gift. And it's a remarkable statement when you think about it from a guy like Paul, who had more than his share of failures and more than his share, really, of character flaws as he went through life. I am what I am by the grace of God. Paul was free from having to put on airs or pretend to be anything other than who he was, a sinner saved by grace. That's point 1, I think, and to Paul's ability to be resilient and face the future with such courage and a willingness to embrace it. He knew his value as a gift rather than an achievement. And along with that, I think there is a kind of a second point that you could make about Paul as he practiced his faith. Even though Paul had a healthy sense of self-worth and identity centered in God, that he was a beloved child of God, he also, I think, kept a real sense of humility, that he didn't know all that he needed to. He was loved, beloved child of God, but he was by no means perfect, and he kept this kind of humble attitude in his relationship with other people. He never postured himself as being some spiritually superior person to others who didn't share his views. And he didn't think he knew it all when it came to the spiritual life. He always, now we see in a mirror dimly. You remember he says this in 1 Corinthians 13? I love it that we read 1 Corinthians 13 at weddings a lot. And it's often read because of the great love chapter. If I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong. But the part that I think is most appropriate for weddings, now we see in a mirror dimly, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, but then face to face. You don't know all that's going to lie ahead, and there's always more to learn when it comes to the deep things of God. And Paul was very much in that vein of being a lifelong learner. He would echo that beautiful psalm. The psalmist is in the temple, and he's talking about God being his rock and his fortress. And I love what he says at the end of that little section of Psalm 31. Thou hast set my feet in a large room, or set my feet in a broad place. That's what religion should do, shouldn't it? It should open us up and not narrow us down. And that's the way Paul looked at his own faith. I don't know everything. It's like some of it will be revealed later down the way. I'll keep an open mind. He knew who he was, beloved by God, but he also was humble enough to know he didn't by any means know it all when it came to the deep things of God. And he was gentle toward people who did not share his own particular faith perspective. He wasn't harsh or judgmental toward them. Do you remember that beautiful story in Acts 17 when Paul is invited to speak to the intellectuals in Athens, Greece at the Areopagus, kind of this lecture hall? Paul is to give a talk on this Jesus movement that's unfolding in the synagogues all around. And of course, Paul, wanting to know his audience, he walks around Athens in preparation for giving his talk, and he sees that they have all these little shrines set up to all these different gods. You know, there's a pantheistic culture in first century Greece. And so there are gods to Diana and gods to Zeus, and there's all these other gods that Paul notices this as he walks down. And he also sees there's this one little shrine that's marked to an unknown God, which was sort of like the safety valve for the pagan religion. If we missed any of these gods that we should have revered, this will be the one that we could say, well, you know, we caught you in the to an unknown God shrine. And Paul sees this, and then he goes to speak to the Athenians. And you know, Paul didn't believe in any of the things that they were worshiping, but he has this kind of delightfully disarming and humble way of approaching them. He says, "Oh, men of Athens, I see you are a very religious people. I share with you the same kind of desire to be connected to God, and I've looked at all of your shrines as I've made my way through town, and I even saw that you had a shrine marked to an unknown God. You know, I just happen to know who that God is." And that is the segue for him to give witness to the power of Jesus that transformed his life, and that comes, Paul says, from the very creator of the cosmos, the same God you desire to be connected to. I think it's kind of a brilliant, brilliant thing. Paul kept an open mind, and he kept a kind of a humble posture as he went through life. And I think it kept him ready for anything as the years went by. He trusted that if he would just open the doors and encourage, God would bring people to faith in due course. It wasn't all up to him to make it happen. So he has that gentle way. And then the other thing that I would want to add about Paul's faith in terms of his resilience as a person is I think Paul really did come to believe that the fact that he would have deep faith didn't mean that things would always go well. You know, there would be times when you just weren't going to be treated fairly by life, but God would still be faithful to you. God would be present and help you, not so much to get out of trouble, but to get you through trouble when it came. I think that was sort of the difference. For him, faith was not sort of like Teflon, so that if you have enough faith, you know, nothing will ever stick to you. Not true. You know, a lot of stuff stuck to Paul. He had a rough time in a lot of ways. And the fact that he was faithful sometimes meant he had more trouble, not less, in his life. But what he believed is that God would uphold him through that, so that no matter what stuck to him, it was not the end of the story. That he was an exceedingly durable missionary, but you may remember the story of Paul's health problems. You remember there's little allusions throughout Scripture. Paul didn't have perfect health, despite how tough he was going through life. Scholars suspect maybe it was epilepsy, but we don't really know. Paul refers to it in the Bible as my thorn in the flesh, which is a pretty good description that it was miserable for him. And we also know Paul went a variety of places trying to seek relief from that. 3 times I have asked the Lord to rid me of this pain, he writes in 2 Corinthians. And knowing Paul's tendency, probably he asked a lot more than that, but he says this 3 times. And the Greek word he uses is not, that's translated ask in the English, is to beg. 3 times I begged the Lord to rid me of this pain. And each time, he gets no relief. He gets no cure. But finally, the last time, we are told, he hears in the depth of his own soul a voice, which he says is clearly for him was the voice of God saying, "Paul, my grace is sufficient for you." And at that moment, Paul was not made well, but he was healed in the sense that he knew whatever his ailment did, whether it stayed with him or not, It was not going to define him, and it was not going to limit him. I love that quote from Ernest Hemingway. He said once, "Life, sooner or later, breaks all of us, but some of us manage to get strong at the broken places." And I think that's kind of Paul's reality there. In that moment, he got strong at the broken places. And he resolved, I will go forward, kind of put my hand in the hand of God. There is a wonderful phrase from the ancient church fathers that they used to use back in the 2nd century. They called it falling into God, which is a wonderful metaphor of trust. Falling into God. Like, birds learning to fly. You let go of the branch and you fall what seems like will be into nothing, only to discover that there is something upholding you that you can't see, but that is very much real. And that's kind of how Paul lived his life, I think, day by day. My God will supply all we need from his glorious resources. So I thought that was worth talking about today. I don't know what the new year will hold for me or for you. I don't know what stocks will go up, what politicians will skyrocket, which ones will fall flat. Probably none of us do. But I do know that in the midst of uncertainty, it is given to us to know that we can be ready for anything through the one who strengthens us. And I can do no better, I think, on the first Sunday of the New Year than close with a poem. I first came across it in a book by Peter Gomes when he was chaplain at Harvard. He wrote a little piece that included a poem quoted by King George VI on Christmas Day, 1939. Europe, as you remember, 1939 was on the brink of World War II, and the poem that the king quoted was by an obscure Canadian poet, Minnie Louise Haskins, and it was entitled The Gate of the Year. And the lines became kind of famous, but I think they're kind of a beautiful way to think about the prospect that lies ahead. And it goes like this. "And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand in the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way.' Amen."